Hi, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening to this virtual summit. Welcome to what we hope will be a dynamic session on medtech trends and opportunities across Europe and Canadian geographies. I'd like to thank the EU-Canada Chamber of Commerce for the opportunity to host this virtual panel. My name is Jahangir Apu. I'm based in Calgary, Canada. Happy to moderate this panel with esteemed guests today. My relevance to the group today is that I combine roles of finance with healthcare as I run a VC fund today after having previously had a couple of decades of experience as a cardiovascular surgeon and also worked in the healthcare systems in Canada, the US, and the UK. We have a group of 5 panelists today from 2 from Europe and 3 from Canada. And each of our panelists has their profiles listed in the app. So I'll ask them to just briefly introduce themselves in 60 to 90 seconds. And maybe I could ask the panelists to focus on 1 or 2 points about how their work is relevant to the topic that we're discussing today. Why don't we start from west to east across the globe, and maybe Wendy from British Columbia.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here today. I'm thrilled to be a part of this virtual conference. My name is Wendy Hurlbert. I'm the President and CEO of Life Sciences British Columbia. We are a not-for-profit organization that represents the broad life sciences sector, so academia, research, medtech, digital health, biotech, many global industries as well, in addition to many of those organizations that have services directly associated with life sciences, so regulatory consultants, privacy, etc. A little bit about me. I've spent my career in life sciences and technology, actually flipping back and forth between the two. So where we sit in the life sciences sector right now is super exciting for me because it's the ultimate convergence of my background. Most of my roles were in CFO or COO roles, which included regulatory, quality, healthcare compliance, privacy, ops, distribution. I've worked globally, being located in South Asia for 2 years. I've had global roles. I've worked in the US, in Europe, and in Canada. So super excited to be here, and thanks for having me.
Wendy, thanks for joining us. Good to have you. If we move across 1 province in Canada, going into Alberta on the other side of the Rockies, Niraj Gupta, please.
Thanks for having me. My name is Niraj Gupta. I'm a Chief Strategy Officer with Therapeutics, which is one of the scale-up companies in robotics in Canada. I'm also Chief Advisor for Technology and Innovation Investments with Invest Alberta, which is part of Government of Alberta. And what we do is help different companies which are planning to set up their headquarters or R&D centers or business centers in Alberta. I'm also an angel investor. I've invested in 30-odd companies across the globe. My background has been, I've been serial entrepreneurs. I'm one of the experts on IP as well. I've studied in India, in Sweden, and in US, so have been part of a lot of global ecosystems. And if you are looking at Alberta or Canada in particular and planning to, expand your business base or R&D base, more than happy to help you. Thank you.
Thanks, Niraj. Great to have you. If we go to the eastern part of Canada, we have Sean Karamchandani joining us.
Hi, everyone. Sean Karamchandani. I am an investment advisor for CIC Capital. It's actually a little bit unique in the sense that it is a venture capital and growth capital fund that is backed by a European bank. It's a single LP fund, and we invest typically in either North American companies who have aspirations to grow in Europe, or conversely, European companies with aspirations to expand into North America. We focus in 2 subsectors: technology and healthcare. My background is actually, I developed and sold a health technology device to pharma back in 2009. a pleasure to meet everyone, and look forward to a great discussion.
Thanks, Sean, and your expertise in sort of dealing with both sides of across the ocean would be very valuable. So talking about across the ocean, I think, Gerald, are you joining us from Spain? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Good morning and good afternoon to the European ones who are connected. I'm very pleased to be here. My name is Gerard Albre. I'm a project coordinator at the EIT Health Accelerator in the Spanish hub. I have a bachelor degree in biotechnology and a master's degree in biomedical engineering. I worked for several years in research in the academia and also in the pharmaceutical industry. And then I moved in 2019 to EIT Health, where I currently support European startups to scale up and scale out their innovative businesses in health.
Awesome. Great to have you. We were going to have Jesus join us as well. I don't see him on the call, so maybe he'll be able to join a bit later. He's from MedTech Europe. So just remind the audience to please enter any questions you have into the Q&A, and we'll sort of leave some time at the end to get to them. And if there's sort of burning questions that are topical, we might sort of interrupt the flow of the discussion to deal with them. I'll be able to see them as they come up. And so in terms of the discussion today and try to keep it meaningful for the audience, we thought we'd frame it around three different areas. One is around trends, hot trends in medtech, and sort of highlight some of the strengths in Europe and in Canada. A second area that we wanted to talk about was the regulatory environment in terms of approvals for devices, and also around investment. And the third was really what the different governments are doing to help companies that may be useful to support the infrastructure. So to kick things off in the terms of the trends in healthcare, when we were talking about this before among the panelists, there's lots of different things going on in healthcare globally, but a couple of trends that really stood out to us right now was, one was really around AI. So machine learning, artificial intelligence is an exponential type of technology, maybe akin to the advent of the internet. And multiple different industries are figuring out how it can help them in finance, in retail, et cetera, et cetera. And healthcare is no different. And so the meaningful application of machine learning to healthcare is a field of interest and also of importance going forward. And it's an area that the chapter hasn't been written, so it will evolve with time. So we thought we'd talk a little bit about AI. And the second big area that we talked in terms of trends was around biotechnology and life sciences, and multiple different things going on with therapeutics in the biotechnology space. So that's a framework for the medical trends. So why don't we start with machine learning, and we can talk about the different strengths in Europe and Canada with machine learning and IoT. And maybe Niraj could lead us off in that in terms of what your thoughts are as to where Canada is positioned in the space of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, so Canada always have been very strong on analytics and mathematics and AI machine learning. Started from Montreal, which became the hub, and then Toronto, and now Alberta and BC have been very strong on these areas. I'm seeing a huge trend in terms of ecosystem which are being built. Look at one of the top 10 AI ecosystems in the world. One is Mila in Montreal, another is Vector Institute, then third is Amy in Edmonton, Alberta. If you look at all these organizations, they are building and supporting AI research, machine learning, the modeling, data modeling. Universities have been very strong. University of Toronto, Waterloo, University of Alberta and University of Calgary have been at the forefront of AI and machine learning. Now, when we start working on AI machine learning, the applied side of it, that is where suddenly medtech and medtech devices, SaaS platform, and the healthcare and medtech started taking the lead. because the amount of data which is being generated was huge. So Alberta definitely has very strong ecosystem. Look at Alberta IoT, and then Amy, then we have Health City and all those universities. Because of that, suddenly all the deep tech, med tech, health tech companies are getting a lot of support, and that has been a trend. And we are seeing a lot of companies coming in. We know Genome Alberta and Genome Canada, and you might have heard about the budget. The last budget, there was multi-million dollars of funding that was assigned to that, and that's where genomics and AI is doing a lot of forefront in terms of startups. So all in all, if you see, Canada has become a very core hub for deep tech startups and scale ups. Happy to provide more information during our conversation.
So yeah, thanks so much, Niraj. And you mentioned a lot of neat institutions there. So for the audience who may not be familiar with all those names, can you tell us a little bit about what Mila is, what Vector is, and what Amy is? Because I think there may be people even from Canada and from Europe who aren't familiar with those institutions.
Absolutely. So these are federally and also provincially funded nonprofit institute, if you will. They are primarily research institutes. So what they do is their model is there are a lot of professors and industry people who become part of these organizations. For example, Mila is not just an institute. There is a complete city in Montreal around Mila, wherein if you are part of that, you don't only get the support from Mila, but also get a lot of tax credits and a lot of other support over there. If you look at Amy works primarily in different areas with federally and provincially granted schemes, and works with a lot of big companies and startups, and try to build those portfolios wherein IP is primarily for you, but they kind of create all the support, because AI machine learning is not that simple. And so is Vector Institute. So all these institutes, if you look at it, the best part of these institutes are they are non-profit in nature. Number one, they're well supported. In fact, they probably can collaborate with you in those grants, and they will work with you to create those models, which you probably may be difficult for you to hire those specific people or teams. So that ways, these institutes are pretty open, and very open because they are supported by government. So you write to them and they'll get back to you. They will assign primarily a project manager, and then you can start working on it. Most of these institutes, the only side where they are now evolving is the applied side. They are doing a lot of fundamental AI machine learning research, but that's where these companies are coming in and working together to look into applied side of those models.
Thanks. Yeah. So it sounds like they're interesting sort of public-private partnerships, and they're also located in different parts of Canada. So there's breadth. I'm happy for the other panelists to jump in at any time. From my understanding, Mila, like Montreal Institute of Learning Algorithms, one of their real strengths is also around this important topic of ethics in AI. And in a future panel, we could have somebody from Mila on there. And with Amy, the Alberta Institute for Machine Learning here, they're sort of one of the grandfathers of machine learning with Richard Sutton there. They produce a ton of talent that is swiped up by Silicon Valley and the Googles of the world. So a lot of academic talent coming out of there. And there's to follow up on your thoughts around applying this technology, there's one of the fastest growing companies, I believe, in Alberta, AltaML, is a company that looks at taking this talent coming out of Canada and using that talent to help corporations use machine learning to improve their business. And so AltaML sort of bridges that academic to commercial pathway.
Absolutely. And one more thing, last point, Canada is one of the core members of GPA, Global Partnership on AI. In fact, Mila, Elements.ai, a couple of people are core part of the team, and they are working, like there are 27 countries which are part of it. So all those AI ethics and AI, IP, commercialization, data, Canada has been on the forefront. So that's another very interesting aspect.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that I think what's elegant about these institutions is that, you know, the goal is to create these super clusters. So you have not only academic bench strength, you have programming bench strength, you have legal bench strength, you have, you know, IP bench strength. And so the idea is they're really trying to create ecosystems that will allow companies to you know, companies or ideas to evolve uh, into bigger entities without always requiring, let's call it, the cost that would typically be required to tap into such resources. So it does create, you know, it certainly creates an environment that fosters collaboration and growth that would otherwise probably be prohibitively expensive for smaller stage companies.
Yeah, and I thought I'd add also in BC, you know, I think someone mentioned the superclusters. So we have the Canada's digital supercluster, which I think builds off of where you were going, which is around the application of AI. And that is again, public-private, you know, publicly funded as supercluster, but they've got a project model where they collaborate on projects with industry and the like in, you know, in creating that broader digital environment. But there are many, many projects that you see come out of there that are really around the application of AI. And we see in BC a number of areas where AI is increasingly involved in drug discovery and with lots of great successes. So, you know, it's nice to see that Canada has that strength, both as you were talking about with both the academic development, but then we can take it through to the application across many areas of industry, not only life sciences.
Yeah, the nice point that I'm hearing there from Wendy and Sean really is that this idea of around the complements, right? So the AI is the technology, but you know where it can be applied and having strengths in those different areas, whether it's in finance, whether it's in ethics or legal around things. So I think that's great. We're going to jump over to Europe in a second here, but there was a question that came up in terms of they wanted access to these AI institutes from the audience. And we can't really post anything that the audience can see. Only the audience can post to us. So I'll just I'll just repeat the names again. So that's vectorinstitute.ai is the institute out of Toronto. Mila is out of Montreal, and it's the Montreal Institute for Learning Algorithms, MILA. And then in Alberta, it's Amy, AMII.ca. So if people want to look up those three institutions. Let's move across the pond. Maybe Gerard can tell us a little bit about this new technology called AI and how Europe is adapting to it and it is taking it on, or how
I would
going
say,
over
yeah,
Europe.
I would say for sure that it's taking off. European investment and research in AI, I would say that it's strong when it's grouped together, but of course, as you may know, Europe is a really fragmented market, and also when you see the numbers country by country or by region, they are not that strong. However, we have many initiatives right now and clusters that are working in the ethics and in the legal side of the implementation of AI. What my colleagues were saying before, it's not only about the technology coming from universities or from research, but it's also about the framework where AI can be implemented and the rest of assets that it needs to work. So in Europe, we're currently working a lot in these aspects of ethics and regulation related to the privacy also of final users.
How is that done in Europe, Gerard? Is it sort of each country has their own sort of AI ethics institute, or is there some sort of centralization that one country is working more on the ethics side and another country is working more on you know, the legal side or something else?
There's a common framework through the European Union that provides regulation, but of course, then at the nation, at each country level, there are twists and other legal frameworks that are implemented depending on each country. So even though there is a trend towards centralization, there's still a huge fragmentation of the market and of the legal frameworks across European countries.
Yeah, and sometimes it may be a challenge for companies to try and navigate those that diversity, right?
For sure. I mean, I would say that one of the biggest challenges in the implementation of AI in Europe and in other fields as well has been this fragmentation that it's also perceived strongly from startups coming and other companies coming from other parts of the world. Yeah.
So we have a question from the audience on AI here. Dennis Chamberlain asks, in general, do small companies in Canada export AI to hospitals in Europe? Anybody on the panel want to take that on?
I mean, I think I'd rather phrase it as there are small Canadian companies that export applications of AI to hospitals in Europe. But you can imagine when we talk about medtech, there are very clear privacy and regulatory frameworks that have to be applied in each geography. And so I think, yes, you see a lot of small companies in Canada who created either AI-driven devices or services that are being offered in Europe, but there are there's typically a need to establish local presences to ensure data security and privacy for such applications. So that happens, and by the way, it happens vice versa. There are European companies that offer services in AI-driven services in Canada, but again, there's a need to comply with very strict patient confidentiality and regulatory oversight.
Yeah, for sure. So Gerard, to understand better the European setup, are there, for Canadian companies looking to access these sort of public-private partnerships in Europe, are there specific centers of expertise that are in the UK or in Germany or Spain that you can share with us?
I would say that actually EIT Health is one of the most prominent clusters that is currently working in AI. Recently, we published a work together with McKinsey, a report talking about the landscape, and especially in Europe, regarding AI, that I would suggest to the audience to check because it's really interesting. But at EIT Health, we actually try to overcome this fragmentation by putting together all the different players in the innovation ecosystem that can contribute to the implementation of health solutions, including those related to AI. Yeah.
Maybe Gerard, you could just put into the chat. There's actually a segment there we could put to the panelists or to the audience as well, just a link to EIT Health and what they do. There's a couple more good questions here through the chat. It's asked about fragmentation, to sort of pick on Gerard some more here. And does it make sense to go through Brussels as the seat of the government, of the EU government, to bring technology to European hospitals and other institutions?
I would say that you should not go to Brussels, definitely, as a startup. You should identify actually what market in Europe suits your technology and your needs at that time best. Let's say that you're looking to perform a final clinical validation, then maybe you should have a look, for instance, to Spain, because here we have a great healthcare system. We have great key opinion leaders. It's a public healthcare system, so it's easy to engage patients in clinical trials, or it's quite easy. If you're looking for investment, maybe you should have a look at London. It's true that with the Brexit, maybe there's a relocation of BCs, we don't know, but if you're looking for investment, traditionally London has been the sweet spot of Europe. If you have a digital health solution, probably you're looking into Germany now that they have a Digital Healthcare Act approved in 2019 by the German authorities, which has this DIGA fast track that can implement digital health applications and in their healthcare system, and they can be reimbursed easily.
That's excellent. Thanks so much. So Germany for digital health, UK for finance, and Spain for sort of clinical and regulatory. Excellent. Yeah, excellent points. I just noticed that we have another panelist join us. Jesus Rodriguez is joining us from MedTech Europe, where he's the Director of General Strategies and International Affairs. Promotes the interests of MedTech industry, including policy. Thanks for joining us, Jesus. Where in Europe are you based, Jesus?
I'm based in Brussels, so I'm right here.
Okay.
And
okay,
yeah, I would concur with the previous speaker that this, Brussels in and of itself is not anything special when it comes to establishing yourself in the EU. The options given are very good. It depends on your technology and where you have really a good point of contact that you're going to establish yourself in Europe. London is a little bit difficult these days because if you work through the UK, you're not going to have access to the rest of Europe anymore. So it will be only for the UK, and that is challenging. And even then, that's really a lot more challenging. So there are also other opportunities for venture capitalists in other parts of Europe now. It's changing, it's shifting because of Brexit. So maybe you would want to consider the Netherlands, or maybe you want to consider some other areas like Munich is also a very strong VC in the area of medtech.
awesome. That's great information for our audience. Thank you. And I want to sort of keep the audience engaged here. There's a question that I don't think is an easy question that Matej Netkov has posed around really size of company. Like, when should a company look to expand either, across the ocean, either way? What size should that company be? Should they have product in market? How many employees should that company generally have? What is an optimal time to look across the ocean in terms of company size? Any of the panelists want to take that on?
That's a very complex question, and I'm not sure there's a one size fits all answer. Look, I think that.
How about a 90-second one?
Yeah, I think the reality is that I think a company needs to identify one, how much capital does it have to deploy, and where is that capital best invested? Anytime you have to expand geographically or manage teams in multiple parts of the world, inevitably there is usually some form of cost or expense to do so. That said, I mean, a company needs to go where its customers value its services most highly, or where it has a pathway for growth or investment that's most attractive. And I'm not sure it's ever number of employees or number of customers or top line, et cetera, that should be the decision factor as to whether or not there's a international expansion. I think it should be a question of, is there time, are there resource, and is there capital to support such a move? And if the answer is yes, that should be considered by the company. But I'm certainly oversimplifying that decision, and I'll let other panelists weigh in on this.
Yeah, I mean, I can weigh in a little bit on that as well. And I apologize, there's construction in the room beside me. That's why I keep looking down to try and ask them to stop drilling. But anyway, so if there's a lot of background noise. But I think the question of expansion, it's what Sean just said. It really is very dependent on on where you are. But I also think it needs to come down. Expansion in itself is not a goal. It's actually, what objective do you have with respect to expansion? So we have a number of Canadian companies that have expanded into European markets because they found the optimal partner for them. So a very proud Canadian or BC success story is The Pfizer vaccine is actually, the delivery mechanism is based off of a BC-based company that spun out of UBC. It's called Acuitas, and they had been working with BioNTech, now a household name, for 5 years on cancer vaccines. And when, future-facing mRNA-based cancer vaccines, Acuitas makes the delivery mechanism, they very quickly pivoted to start looking at COVID vaccines. In swoops Pfizer, and the next thing you know, we have a vaccine, but the next thing you know, Acuitas is a global company. But their expansion globally was really about looking for partnerships that complemented their technology. And BioNTech was looking for the best partner they could have. They didn't, I'm sure, intentionally decide they wanted to work with a Vancouver-based company, but they found the right partner based off of what they were looking for. So it may not be about the traditional, I have a product, I want to sell it, although many Canadian companies, in particular medtech companies, have their first sales outside of Canada for lots of reasons. But there are a lot of other reasons that people are going to expand globally. So I think you have to think about, what problem are you trying to solve, or what objective are you trying to achieve? The other thing I might add is for Canadian companies, there are lots of resources that will help you determine what markets to go and explore, whether it be your provincial trade commissioners, your associations like ourselves or MedTech Canada, or Global Affairs Canada, have deep resources that are all dedicated to help Canadian companies expand into markets. And I have had a few companies in BC that have worked extremely closely with their Global Affairs Canada counterparts to help them scan the world as to what country is the best place for them to go and expand into. So there are resources there, and to the point, the question is very difficult to answer as it's asked without layering back the onion, but really think about the objective and then reach out to those resources that are available to you to help you answer that question.
Thanks so much, Wendy. Excellent point, Sean. Wendy, Niraj, you had a comment on this as well about company size and when to go.
Wendy and Sean mostly covered all the points. If you are a European company looking into Canada, there are a lot of other organizations, like if you're in Switzerland, then there's something called SwissNext, which is also have office in Canada, in Toronto, and CTI Switzerland, and Enterprise Ireland. There's so many organizations which can help you probably understand the market once you start looking at the global interface. I do understand at times when you are a scale-up company, a lot of pressure is also from your board and investors to kind of look into North American market and via Canada. So while Invest Alberta kind of organizations can also help you and help you understand the market, probably European countries have a lot of these ecosystems like SwissNext and Enterprise Ireland and so many other ecosystems which you should tap to and talk to them, because not only they will provide you the real understanding, but they may also fund you. Just like in Canada, there's Can Export, which can give you money to explore outside. From I've been told, like from Enterprise Island, if you start looking into expansion in different countries, they provide you some sort of a financial support as well.
Thanks, Niraj. Yeah, great points. And also echoing what Niraj said, and then what I heard from Wendy was like this idea about partnerships and figuring out what the right partnerships are and the purpose of the expansion. And Sean talked a little bit around how to spend capital wisely. And I thought that may be a nice segue as we sort of, we could go straight from this question and can go into the idea of around what support there is in different countries for the ecosystem in terms of infrastructure and things. I know we wanted to talk about life sciences and biotechnology, so maybe we'll just sort of circle back to that as a trend. But since this question came up about expansion going across, and then this idea of like how do you spend capital, maybe we could talk about what is the infrastructure provided by the different governments to support this type of move. So I don't know if from Europe, if Jesus or Gerald want to talk about same things in terms of tax credits, in terms of visa applications, in terms of financial support that governments in different places offer for the startup companies in the space?
I would say again that each country has its own policies and frameworks to enhance the landing of international companies in their countries. And I'm not an expert in each regulatory and frameworks that the different countries have to promote this. Not sure if Jesus, maybe you can add on this from Brussels, but in Spain, I would say that we have what we call missions. And for instance, we have important partnerships in the Catalonia region, where is Barcelona based, with the east of Canada, because there are strong links with Montreal and that region. So there are kind of missions where we bring startups from Catalonia to Canada and vice versa.
I would say really the issue of where is it that you're going to find the best partners, the best entry into Europe is a really interesting one. And from an investment perspective, I can't give you all the details of the areas, but I can point you to the areas where people go. And there's a reason why people go there, or several reasons. And so the first I would mention is Ireland. Ireland is very medtech friendly. There's a number of good reasons for that. You mentioned tax breaks, that that they have an advantageous tax regime there, and they do support the medtech industry globally, both to set up in Ireland, but also as a way of using Ireland to expand into the rest of the EU and even beyond. So in that case, in that sense, the Irish government and the Irish institutions are quite helpful. There is a lot of companies that choose to settle in Germany as well. There's interesting hubs, especially in the area around Munich and in Bavaria, but also around Berlin or around Hamburg, which are traditional areas of research and activity in medtech and biotech. And we have seen other places coming up little by little. We're starting to see Eastern Europe becoming more interesting. There are quite a few startups that are choosing to move to places like Czech Republic because of a number of advantages there that are less obvious. So you can have a very highly trained, motivated workforce at a lower cost. You can have some very good engineers. You can have there's different advantages to different areas. So it depends a little bit on your company profile and what it is that you're looking for. But Europe overall is quite diverse, and you will have advantages going to different parts of the place. The Netherlands and Belgium are also traditional places that people go to, both for advantages from the point of view of tax regime, but also a very strong network of support for companies. And I think that that's important because medtech is so complex and diverse that no company can operate on its own. So you really want to be linked to your partners, linked to where you can obtain the resources to make your venture a success.
That's great. That's very useful. What I heard there was this idea of Ireland and Germany being sort of established beachheads, with Eastern Europe offering some different types of emerging advantages, especially in terms of cost of capital, and then also maybe accessing capital in the Netherlands. And in Canada, maybe I could, just being mindful of time, ask Niraj to briefly comment on a couple of programs in terms of the startup visa program that you're familiar with, and sort of cash is always an issue for startups. So something around the tax credits, types of opportunities available to companies in Canada.
Absolutely. So startup visa program is definitely a very strong program federally, and there are close to 45 plus entities, incubators, angel funds, and VC funds you can tap. It's called SUV program, and they're across different geographies. So based on where you're, where you want to land, you should definitely reach out to those sort of granting entities. And it's a process. It's very similar to like if you're talking to a VC, because they will do a due diligence. But if you are a startup based out of Europe, definitely there have been multiple startups which have come over. And in cases like VC and angel funds, which are granting entities, they will also invest. That's one of the conditions. So that way you get support. However, apart from that, there are several federal and provincial grants. Canada is one of those places wherein if you are a startup, you can get a lot of support from governments. There are SHRED grants wherein a part of your R&D can be reimbursed. There are different kind of provincial grants. For example, in Alberta, there's something called Alberta Innovates, which gives you different kind of grants, right from protecting your IP and doing market research to your product or solution development. So if you look at Canada, there are close to 40, 50, federal and provincial grants, which you can tap into. But one of the conditions is you have to come over here and set up the company. But once you come here, there's a tremendous amount of support. And if you are definitely a startup and a little bit of like a scale up, you can come via startup visa program. If you are probably a mid-sized to larger companies, then you can also tap to provincial network like Invest Alberta always helps to the companies which are planning to expand in Alberta. So you can go to investalberta.ca and reach out to everybody's email is there, and reach out to them, and they will jump on a call and start helping you.
Great, thanks, Niraj. Sean or Wendy, do you want us to comment on what Niraj mentioned about the SHRED program? Have you had any experience with companies using that? And if somebody in Europe is coming here, what is the SHRED program?
Yeah, I mean, the SHRED program, which is scientific research and experimental development, effectively, it does vary by the jurisdiction where you actually set up your company, because there's different cash pay versus tax credit reimbursement depending on the specific province in which the company is set up. But the idea is that there are subsidies available when you're this is focused on the development of innovative new technology, and there are ways to subsidize your development costs by filing these grants. And typically, there are many companies that like to locate themselves within Canada because it reduces their cost of development as they file for these applications.
Yeah, I can just add to that the SHRED program has been really critical to the innovation environment in Canada. There's also, in addition to what's talked about in Alberta, most of our provinces across the country have similar type programs. I think Alberta Innovates is by far probably one of the strongest, but we have Innovation BC, and most of the provinces have environments like that. We also have specific tax credits for angel and early stage investments in British Columbia that are incredibly incredibly valuable. I know Alberta used to have that. I think they stopped that last year. And so and then in addition, I think someone already mentioned in our recent federal budget, there's a lot of programming, whether it be through what's called ISED, which is Innovation, Science and Economic Development, or NRC, the National Research Council. So again, if you're looking to expand your business in Canada as a Canadian company, there are lots of resources available that take a little bit of time to mine through, but if you reach out to your counterparts provincially or through the Canadian government, largely the NRC, IRAP people, they can really help you navigate that.
So I want to move. Thanks, Wendy, for that. That's excellent. And so a couple of things. Jesus, there's some comments in the chat and the Q&A directed specifically to you. So maybe you could answer them directly online there. Thank you. And somebody's also asked about France in terms of ease of penetration for a small company. I don't know if Gerald or Jesus have just a brief comment on that.
Jesus,
on
would you
France.
like to start?
Okay, I was starting to look at the questions as you were finishing your question, so I missed that last comment that you were asking. Could you just repeat that for a second?
France in terms of ease of penetration for a Canadian company.
France in terms of ease of penetration. France has got a number of interesting advantages when it comes to its health system. It's got a nice, good central health system. So if you manage to get your products taken up by the French health system, you will be able to actually penetrate the market quite well. But that first initial barrier, getting that recognition in France, can be a bit challenging. We have seen for some technologies that the reimbursement process and being accepted in France can be somewhat of a hurdle for some companies. But then again, that really depends on exactly what your portfolio is and how you're coming at it in the broader sense. So if you have a strong partner in France that's helping you with the distribution and that is able to help navigate you through the French reimbursement system, penetration can go quite fast and quite deep. The French are very open to innovation in healthcare overall. So that if there's something there that works and that solves their problems, they are going to be ready to uptake it and to really deploy it quickly across their whole system. Their whole health system.
All right, France is open to innovation. Great.
Yeah, I mean, I might actually add. I think that thinking about one country versus another country, I think that may be oversimplifying things a little bit, because you always have to think about regulatory approval such that your device is approved, and then reimbursement approval. And those are two extremely separate and distinct things. And the reality is that I don't think I would recommend that anyone only target one country. You have to examine where the payer supports the specific technology that you're trying to apply. Because, you know, the issue with a lot of med tech or of new technologies is that even if they're proven to be efficacious from a clinical outcomes perspective, reimbursement can be particularly challenging in ensuring that the reimbursement rate supports the business model is equally complex. So I think when you look at any country, France or otherwise, you have to think about one, regulatory approval, and then two, reimbursement approval as very, very separate and equally important concerns to evaluate.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I can see those are sort of comments coming from experience. So, you know, regulatory and reimbursement, think of them as separate strategies, and maybe find a country that works with both of those arms. Like one of those arms is not adequate, is what I'm hearing from Sean. So thanks for that. So in the last, you know, we've been doing some questions and answers as we go along. So we've got about 15 minutes left here, and I think maybe the last 15 minutes we can focus on this other trend that we talked about in medtech investing, is around biotechnology and life sciences. And we can also talk a bit about the regulatory environments in these. So
we just lost you for a minute.
Okay, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, but
okay,
we didn't.
Awesome.
If you had a question, we didn't hear it.
Okay, awesome. No worries. So I was going to say we're going to focus a little bit on the biotech industry, and maybe we can start in Canada with Wendy from British Columbia, and you know, maybe inform or share with our guests here today in terms of what's happening with biotechnology in BC, and really, if you can focus on why it's an exciting time for biotechnology in BC today, and what some of the reasons behind that excitement that have driven that excitement.
Sure. Well, it is a incredibly exciting time in the world of biotech, and for that matter, medtech too, in British Columbia and Canada, for that matter. We wrote a report with the British Columbia government, a couple of that based off of 2018 data that we released in the fall. And at that point, British Columbia was the fastest growing life sciences sector within Canada. and one of the fastest growing in the province. This is all pre-COVID, and it's fair to say that Canada, and in particular British Columbia, really punched above its weight through COVID. So I already talked about Canada's contribution to the Pfizer vaccine. You also see Canadian technology in the Moderna vaccine as well. Then we have AbCellera that produced the therapeutic that is being used globally for mild to medium symptoms of COVID, and they're actually on their second stage with very promising results of a new therapeutic. But I think, you know, why is this happening? It's not because everybody started working on this stuff January 2020. We have a long history in Canada and in British Columbia about investing in world-class research and really focusing on areas that we can be very strong. And I think Canada has done a great job. You see some also great stuff coming out of Quebec, where we have really great strength. And we look at it as in oncology, precision medicine, clearly mRNA, anything small molecule. Canada is very strong in nano, and anything nano is an area of great strength. And the other thing that you see very much across a lot of our innovation in Canada, and this is where you see it across the spectrum of life sciences, is we're very good at cross-disciplinary science. So what I mean by that is chemistry meets physics, biology meets physics. You know, the first drug-eluting stent was created in Canada. Mm-hmm. You know, and so you see that cross-disciplinary science coming together within our academic institutions, and then you see it in the innovation that gets spun out of academia. And so, you know, Carl Hansen, the head of AbCellera, is a physicist. He's now developing therapeutics. And, you know, a little bit of the story behind that, they've been at this for 20 years, and they've created a platform that helps you identify at a very, very micro level. They were given one of the first blood samples of COVID-19, of a COVID-19 patient back in January 2020, and they were able to identify the antibody using their technology platform. So it goes back to how this conversation started with that deep computing and AI expertise that Canadians have, and then the application of that.
Thanks, Wendy. So, you know, small is big in BC, and, you know, big things can happen from small molecules.
Well, yeah, and so just as a little commercial, we have seen an unprecedented amount of capital that has flowed into our country in the last 18 months. In BC alone, we brought in $2 billion worth of capital through 1920. So unprecedented. We have, you know, Quebec has had Repair and a couple of others that have gone public, but in BC alone, we have 5 biotech companies that are over $1 billion in market cap now, plus the largest medical device design company in Canada. So it's a really, really strong market today, and many of these companies are small and looking for partnerships and looking to expand. So a great opportunity for European and Canadian collaboration.
Love that point, Wendy, and also sort of how it ties into something that Sean said at the top of the hour, which is around, you know, if you've got $5 billion biotech companies, it also builds the finance space around biotech. It also builds the legal space around biotech and builds all these complements to support. So if somebody has another company they want to start in that space, all those supporting structures are key. And also love the comment around how neat things happen when you cross disciplines. We've seen this in the history of innovation from Charles Darwin to today. And you were talking about how crossing different scientific organizations can lead to very interesting things. That's great. So biotechnology strength in BC. How about in Europe? Are there areas, are there countries that are focused on that therapeutic biotechnology excitement? Where are those?
I can speak for Spain that here for sure we have an exciting ecosystem right now. There are many biotech companies coming out from universities with really, really strong science behind. For sure, there are other regions in Europe, like Jesus was commenting before, in southern Germany, also in Paris, in France, and I would say the Netherlands too. But here, historically, the issue has been attracting huge investment in early stages of biotech companies. And right now, together with the European Investment Fund, EIT is launching a program called Venture Center of Excellence that is tackling exactly, precisely this issue. We're trying to bring together all the investment strength in Europe, VCs, family offices, business angels, also tech transfer offices that can invest. And we're bringing all this power together to try to increase the size of the financing rounds at earlier stages in biotech enterprises.
Is that the link that you put in chat earlier, Gerald?
This is another one, but I will for sure also share
add
it
that
with the
in.
audience.
That would be great. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And then, for companies, when they cross the ocean, they may have to repeat clinical studies, or if they've already approved in one country to get to a different country, or they may not be approved. So maybe we could talk a little bit about the clinical environment. I know Sean has some ideas as to why Canada is an interesting place. Maybe we've only got about 7-8 minutes left. We could sort of try and split it between the clinical trial side, but also always important to companies is the investment side. And so let's spend the first half on the clinical trials, then we'll spend a few minutes on capital.
Yeah, so I think that Canada is often, I'd say, a little bit overlooked when it comes to as a geography to conduct clinical trials for the purposes of, I'm going to say, North American regulatory approval, and I mean that truly FDA and Health Canada. And the reason I say that is the data collected in a clinical trial that's conducted in Canada is deemed to be equivalent to FDA data, meaning trials that are monitored by the FDA auditors will come to Canada and review the data as though it was, it's deemed to be on par with data produced in the US. The difference is obviously that traditionally the cost to conduct these trials in Canada is materially reduced. I'd say for two reasons. One, it's a public healthcare system, and that means that the insurance costs and the reduced litigation means that the reimbursement for investigators is more reasonable. And secondly, the Canadian dollar is discounted to the American dollar, and therefore the cost of resources, staff, et cetera, to run these trials is at at minimum 20 to 30% discount just on a currency rate than if you factor in the average budgets that we see in Canada versus the US. There's a further discount. So traditionally you see a 30+% discount for the same study conducted in Canada as is conducted in the US. I'd say we've talked about SHRED and the fact that there is SHRED eligibility for studies that are developed in Canada, which offers a meaningful tax and funding benefit. But I also think it's important to think about the diversity of the population, right? As we all know in clinical development, ensuring that there's racial and ethnographic diversity is becoming more and more important, and Canada happens to be on average more multicultural than certain geographies in the US, and I don't think we can paint with a broad brush, but generally speaking, there's more ethnic and cultural diversity within Canada, and an ability to target populations that cultural backgrounds that have clinical variances in outcomes, they're very achievable within the Canadian environment. And then I would say, last element that's very important in terms of speed of approval, IRB, et cetera, we run on par with the FDA. What I always like to say is there are a lot of drugs that meet the FDA standard that don't meet Health Canada standard. It's much less frequent that the inverse happens. So, imagine if you can prove, you can get regulatory approval in Canada, you're almost guaranteed to get it in the US, whereas vice versa is not always true, but the data you collect is equivalent. So you're not having to rerun the trial or spend more money if you ran that study in Canada. So there are a number of reasons why Canada can actually be an extremely attractive geography to clinically validate your, whether it's device or therapeutic over the US, and still gives you access to both FDA and Health Canada approvals at the end of the day.
Thanks, Sean. And to double click on your point that you brought up about universal healthcare, like maybe another advantage around that universal healthcare system is the ability to enroll the right patients and to enroll a diverse population. And it probably contributes to lower costs, but also like consenting patients in Canada is generally easier than some other countries. I think it's partly just we all belong to one system sort of thing. Jesus, maybe we'll ask you about the clinical trial environment in Europe. I presume that each institution has their own REPs and each country has their own. Are there certain places that stand out as being super efficient, super attractive, different than other regions?
I would say when you're looking at conducting studies in Europe, there's two big things to look at. It's looking at where do you have the resources that you're looking at for the study. So that is on the one hand, the right population. We discussed the kind of population that you need. Some areas of Europe, you're more likely to find young people. Some areas you're more likely to find older folks. That can be important in the clinical trial design. It's also about where you have the centers of excellence that you can pick up for those studies. So we see that in Europe, you have studies that are conducted across Germany. The Nordic countries are quite good for clinical studies. Sweden, Finland, they have a history and a tradition of conducting quite rigorous studies that, like you said, are then very easy to accept elsewhere. So you don't run into the kind of problems that you might have with the trial designs and issues on running of the trials. Generally speaking, you will find that in Southern Europe, in Spain in particular, but also in Italy and France to some extent, there is a lot of willingness from the population to engage in trials. So recruitment into trials is fairly straightforward. So you have different advantages in different areas. And most of the companies that we work with, when they do trials in Europe, they don't do trials in a single site. They're usually going to have multiple hospitals spread across multiple member states in order really to capture all these differences and get a more robust data set. And that tends to work very well. I think Gerard has some experience in this as well.
Excellent. So we're really sort of getting to wind up, but we want to talk a little bit about dollars, and we have some links put into the chat already by Gerald and Jesus about VCs in Europe and investment opportunities. Niraj, we've got 90 seconds, 60 seconds maybe to wrap up a little bit about investment opportunities in Canada, or access to capital.
So apart from the grants, I think there is a very strong, healthy investor ecosystem and a lot of specific funds like Your Fund, AIoT Health, Dr. Jahangir, and a lot of other funds which are looking into very specific areas of medtech, deep tech, health tech area. So if you are looking at support in terms of investment. Sean has been very active. You definitely should reach out to these funds. I have seen there was a data that in last 18 months, around 18% of the investment overall in Canada has happened in health and life sciences, which is very exciting. Like this is something which is interesting, and health sector, medtech, biotech is a very huge priority for us, and so is for investors and government organizations. So if you're looking at getting funded, getting the grant, definitely reach out to those funds and provincial and federal schemes.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap up here. I want to thank the EU-Canada Chamber of Commerce for hosting this. Really like to thank our audience for active participation today and peppering us with questions. It was just the perfect amount. Thank you so much. And really to our panelists who've sort of done this without any previous real scripting here and come together from different geographies, different parts of the world. Thank you to everybody. And to close,